minute, 20 minutes. So let's just go dive into it from a persona perspective. And Dimitri, do you want me to set the context for how we got into this?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So one of the things, we've done in marketing, we always talk about personas. Who's the buyer persona? Who are we trying to talk to? What are their problems? Understanding the personas we sell to. And it was a product management meeting, I think, Dimitri, about a month ago. Sure. You were talking about the work in the UX handbook and the GitLab design, that we were doing, you guys were doing around defining personas and trying to work on defining that, which you have to do for users as well. And it had happened that in parallel, I had resurrected some work I had done at HP Software and Micro Focus, where because we were selling to these unique groups of people, whether it's testing and QA or it was ops or security, one of the observations I made was that in an IT organization, and because I used to live it, the aha or the conclusion I reached was and it's funny, one of the guys I talked to recently called them feudal kingdoms. But there's these groups that exist that don't have, they might be defined by the org chart, but they're more defined by their culture, by who they talk to, who they listen to. It's persona-like, but they have their own culture. Security is, we don't want to have risk. We want no vulnerabilities. They're all focused on reducing risk, whereas, the people in the PMO are focused on schedule and budget, on time and their cadence. They go to different conferences. They speak different languages. And when I'd go to happy hour after work, they would sit at different tables because they were different and they saw each other differently. And so thinking about how how our customers, the people that work in the IT shops that we sell to, how do we think about those cultures? How do we start to interact with them? So we started to use that as a way to define a kind of a top-down layer of saying, what are the hidden IT groups? What are these groups that there's not a precise definition that says, oh, I'm this. But when you talk to them and you listen to them talk, it becomes really, really obvious of what culture, what group are they really part of. And so that's one of the things we started doing. We've done persona work in the past. Before I joined, we actually had hired a consultant. We'd had somebody outside do some outsourced work on a couple of different personas. And so that was where I said to Dimitri, we've got to connect and kind of loop back in and talk about how do we, what's the interconnect between what we're doing in product marketing of messaging, of our outbound messaging, to what you guys are doing from a UX, and how do we evolve our tool? It just makes sense to talk.
I'd like to add to that from the UX perspective as well, and product management, that personas is just on the verge of getting wide adoption within GitLab. The personas are finally being defined, and we should work together as much as we can to be able to push that effort throughout the whole organization. And that is kind of what got us kickstarted as well, aside from the whole talk that you just did, which was on point. And to give less piece of context to this, so this meeting was already there before you joined, Christy, and I thought it was also nice to include you into this, to get you kickstarted on the persona effort as well, get you included, be up to date, form a team, get this handled correctly. So that is the context, I'd say.
I very much appreciate that. Let me throw one little extra thing in there, which is I went to the VP office hours, VP of Engineering office hours last Thursday, and I came out with 3 big action items from Eric, and one of them was persona. So specifically what he brought up is, and I don't know anything beyond this because I have not researched it. I have not had time, but I'm sure you guys, when I say it, will go, He said that we have 3 different sets of personas right now. So we have one through marketing, one through UX, and one through, I can't remember the third that he said. And the ask from him was for us to rationalize those and put them in one place. So that can be a part of this effort.
I think we need to do that. I mean, we continue to research we look at it from a buyer perspective. We try to understand the person's going to write the check and what problems they're having. that's going to drive them to write a check. It's kind of related, but it's, you know, when you look at it from a different perspective of what's a user's problem, what are they trying to do? And sometimes buyers might be users. Today, we don't have an exec. When we think about executives using GitLab or leaders using GitLab, I don't think we've really ever thought about that. I mean, you know, before I joined, I started to use GitLab to do project management. I had no interest at all in having a repository. I didn't want to know Git. I didn't need to know Git. I was running a team, and my team needed a place to manage issues and to do planning. That's all. And so from a user experience, this was over a year ago, and it's still, I think, arguably true today, that when you get GitLab, you kind of get it all, and here, figure out what you're going to do with it. It's like a lump of clay. And as a user, as an executive, that's not going to, they want green lights and green bars and dashboards and really high level views of the world, which we're not there yet, right? We haven't thought about that as a whole set of personas to solve for, which, to be honest, when I listened to the sales team, the QBRs last week, you know, one of the threads that I heard in the various discussions was, we got to beat Jira. Goldman Sachs has told us, figure out how to go displace Jira. And one of the things with displacing Jira is going to be executive dashboards and visibility that we don't have today, that we're going to have to solve for. But yeah, so I think Eric's request is spot on. We need to figure this out and get aligned, because there's no reason to do duplicative work, right? As we start to define these groups, these areas, you know, I've got a point of view and a perspective from having lived in some of them and having had to work with them. So at some level, I'm fluent in some of their languages. It's funny, speaking of languages, I was filling out a form over the weekend that said, what's your preferred language? And I put in C++, Java, it wasn't what they were looking for. It'll be curious to see what they come back with.
So can I, would it be correct for me to assume that the reason that we have not done this yet is because we just haven't had the bandwidth to do it?
I think it's a bandwidth. It's bandwidth. It's priority. I mean, given the bandwidth we have and the things that we're doing, it's just a question of when do we do it and where do we do it. So last year there was, you know, in product marketing, there was some work to do to define a couple of key personas, and I can send you the link to those. In the design, you know, the work that Dimitri and the team has done around design, there's been work to define a set of personas. And I just think we have to start to prioritize as to how do we do this and where do we go.
Am I understanding correctly that basically this effort is to drive the existing effort home? So there's a lot of work that's been done. It just hasn't been all pulled together and kind of finished out yet.
You know, I think this is something that will always be somewhat of a work in progress for us.
Sure, but honest. I mean, yeah, absolutely. I think they'll always be evolving. But I mean, in terms of us feeling like, yes, we can say we have done a thing, it is usable now.
Yeah, and personally, I think if we were to make some decisions, okay, let's create a home for where we're going to start to place and keep all of the persona work we do, and we're collaborating on, put it into the same repository, the same home. Repository is one of those words that has meaning. Yeah. So, yeah, but I think
I want to quickly give context, by the way, because although I'm, you know, I did try to set up this meeting, most of the persona work actually was done by Sarah and Catherine. Emily, etc. That was not my.
For the record, you did not come across as having owned anyone else's work.
I like John saying it, but it wasn't correct. I needed to say, you know.
No, and I was joking too. I mean, but yeah. So I think we just have to figure out how do we drive this forward. And the last thing I want to see us do is duplicate work and effort. And I have a very, 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 very strong belief that getting our UX, getting the you know, how do we make GitLab useful for a VP of apps? Not Sid, not a GitLab VP, but a real VP of apps who frankly doesn't care too much about the tool, but cares about knowing how their team is meeting the business need and how big they want the big picture, to be able to have a snapshot and a view of the big picture. How do we solve for that? Or how do we solve for the project manager? Let's say project manager for now versus product manager, two different personas that will exist in the world for a long time to come. How do we solve for them? Product managers are going to go more technical, project managers a little less technical, more focused on flow. I don't know. It's a very, very real challenge that we have to figure out how do we solve for that, because GitLab, the product, philosophically, we've had a belief that we don't want to create lots of different roles in GitLab. I mean, Dimitri, you've been here a long time. You understand the view about how many roles we're going to add to GitLab. We don't add a lot of roles.
Quite a few, I'd say.
Well, we don't add them. I mean, but think about it. You're either, what are the roles? There are what? You're a developer role.
I mean, it's about specialization, right? I mean, in the future, looking at product management, for example, it could, there could be product owners and product managers. So there would be an additional one that, we need to think of. And I'd say the same would go for any other role inside of the company. So one, maybe two, or even three, in terms of how we decide to specialize.
But we use roles to define access, right? We use roles to define access to parts of GitLab in the product. And when I think of roles, I think of
access management, or
yeah. I mean that's part of what defines access to different parts of the tool. This is where the language, I think, might make it. We might have to figure out how do we be prescriptive or clear as to what we mean. I don't know.
Yeah. At the same time, John, I don't want to too much interrupt you, but I'd like for us to have at least one or two action points coming out of this meeting. Getting us a step further. I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to, discover and argue about a lot of the things that are involved with this, but that is best done asynchronously instead of synchronously. And I had as a idea of like how, so one of the action items comes from Christy, I'd say, how can we unify all the personas across the organization? And the second one would be, how can we make them used? I mean, and that was the point that I was most concerned with. We got this persona information done by Sarah and Catherine, Emily, etc. Now, who is actually using it, and how is it going to be used? Because that process is not really yet in place. And I would like to invite Sarah and Catherine this way, like how they would see that working, or how they thought it was going to work out, or what has been discussed before.
Yeah, so the original personas were one of the first things I worked on when I joined GitLab. We've been here 2-3 months, and at the time there was no product marketing team as well. So the way the personas were worded were really for UX and marketing. And then they kind of came outdated. No one was really using them. They were very wordy. They weren't your typical personas. I just found out a lot about users and I wanted to share it. And then we had the initiative last August, which was an OKR for the UX research team to do new personas. These were led by Catherine, Emily, and Andy. And we found that we had meetings with all the product marketing, product team, and all the designers to see what they wanted to get out of the new personas. And there was two very distinct groups. We found that on the secure and the ops side, we wanted personas at a high level. So we didn't really know who would be using the ops features, like the sysadmins and people like that. Where were the responsibilities of a DevOps engineer? And then on the other side, on the development side, they felt they knew the users a lot better. They didn't really want personas. They only wanted them when they were designing a feature and wanted them created on a per feature basis rather than as broad as a developer, for example. They already felt like they had a good understanding of who they were. So we created the personas. They got added to the design system. We're now in a place where Dimitri very kindly added personas to the issue template so product managers could think about using them more. However, we have had a bit of a mixed reaction to this myself, me and Catherine, in terms of we had someone, an engineer the other week, open an issue in the UX research project to say, can you create a persona for this person? And when we dug into why that person wanted a persona, it was because they could open an issue. And they didn't think that any of our existing personas matched who we wanted to design for. And I think this is an issue that, as we were just touching upon earlier, that we're going to run into a lot. You know, we've got GitLab, which is everyone can contribute. How many personas do you create? Where do you draw the line? And something that I've been thinking about is, like, we know that the reporting isn't working within the UX research team, and we're thinking about moving to an insights repository. And what that would mean is that we would tag the insights repository with the different people that we're speaking to, so that when a designer comes to work on something and they think, well, I want to know more about this person, I can use the filter and I can see all the interviews that all the researchers have done to find out more about who that person is. And that's where I think UX personas will become stronger, is when they're actually created from the insights as they're going into the directory and they're being kind of updated. Whereas I think what marketing wants is slightly different. I think they probably want the persona more in the form that we got them now. And perhaps that's where the ownership needs to change, is the personas that exist now should probably go across to marketing, and we can develop those in conjunction with marketing. But I think the ones that are being created now more on the fly and for features should come out of the insights repository. I'd also argue that to some extent, some of the product managers that I've spoken with, because I'm going through a big thing of speaking to all the product managers at the moment, have said that they don't find the personas useful because they feel like they talk to customers every single week. So therefore they feel they already have a good understanding of the people who, you know, they're creating features for. I think it's different for designers. I think designers more heavily rely on personas, but I think that's because designers at the moment are not as close to users and customers as product managers are. They're not speaking to them on a regular basis, which again is something that I feel needs to be addressed as well. Rather than just coming through myself or Catherine all the time, they perhaps need to be more one-on-one with users and customers. That's kind of everything from the UX side, so I don't know. I think I definitely think we can't go on just creating personas willy-nilly every time someone opens an issue. We have to draw a line somewhere. At the same time, I want to be in a position where we can support designers as they're building something to get them an idea of the person that they're designing for.
Yes, as you're talking, so I agree completely. I think to have a persona for every feature, like this way lies madness, right? I love your idea of using the research repository to help push usage of personas, at least amongst the UX team. I think that's a really smart idea. I was kind of taking notes as you were talking, and one of the things that came out is it seems like we need persona guidelines, right? To where we actually like say, this is what a persona means to us. This is when we will create a persona. This is the level at which the persona will be. Okay, that's great. So Sarah, I would like your opinion on this, something I had been thinking about over the weekend. So I started thinking about you and Catherine being, you know, basically the only two researchers right now. And I had this request come in from Eric, and I thought, how do we satisfy Eric and still keep doing the things that you guys obviously already have existing priorities. I know we do have some research candidates in the queue. Hopefully we'll be hiring someone soon. How do you feel about having a plan that basically for the next researcher we hire, their first project would be to drive forward on at least the UX personas, not necessarily the marketing personas, that's up for debate, but it felt like maybe it could be also a good introduction to a researcher to our company. Thoughts?
I think it depends on to what extent you mean. So the personas that we've got in the design system are up to date at the moment because we are updating them every time we find out insights that are relevant to those people. So I think like the UX personas are kind of formed is how I would see it. But I am wondering whether those UX personas should now really become the ownership of marketing. So like we've got them in the design system. I know that marketing have got their own personas, and maybe there's somewhere we can collaborate and pull them together, and then they are maintained by marketing. And I think the UX personas, like I said, they should be created more from the insights repository. So we'd be pulling together the insights to create a persona. And the way we might do this, for example, is for every insight will be in an issue, and then we might use an epic to say designer. And every insight that we've got about a designer will be linked to that epic.
I have a better sense now of how you were thinking about using that tactically. Thank you. Yeah, that's an interesting way to do it. So no matter what, I think that's super useful. I think that's a really good idea. Do we also need to have maybe just one small layer that sits above that as a UX persona, like as a descriptor for a UX persona? Maybe. I don't know. I would love to talk with you more about that. I'm totally in on having, if marketing wants to take over ownership of the existing personas, and it sounds like there are a couple of missing personas there from you, John, especially at the executive level.
Help if I wasn't on mute. Yeah, my objective it's not about ownership. I think it's a collaboration that we have to have. We have, I think, different needs. But at the end of the day, having insight about the audience that we're trying to reach and we're trying to connect with, whether it's users or buyers, or whether we're doing messaging and content on web pages, or however it is we're reaching out to people. The Just Commit campaign that we're launching, we took a look at this and we said, look, we're not going to message to everyone. We're going to go after the VP of apps, because the director or VP of applications is the person who's most likely to buy GitLab, period, full stop. The CISO is not going to buy GitLab. They're not going to buy GitLab and tell everyone else in the organization, start using GitLab to do development because I like their security features. The VP of operations probably is less likely. I mean, there's situations where they will, but we think we can sell mostly there. So that's why we targeted that. So I think it's a question of how do we collaborate? How do we get together on this, and our understanding of our customers and the people that are buying and using GitLab. We just have to do it together. And for me, at least, it's not ownership, it's together. And I'm updating a link to the hidden IT groups work that I did before.
Yeah, and I think maybe ownership was a misnomer, but I think it comes down to usefulness to our groups. And that's what we're trying to figure out, is what's useful to marketing. And that may or may not be the same thing that's useful to UX, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. I propose that for the UX team, maybe starting with the guidelines and a rough outline, Sarah, of what you have in your head in terms of how we'd actually implement that in the Insights library might be a good place for us to start. Do you agree?
Yeah, definitely. I think as for ownership, I think what I'm more thinking is that there's always been a big debate about where personas should live, whether they should be in a design system or the handbook. And I think perhaps if they go with more of a marketing slant, they should belong in the handbook rather than the design system. And I think we do just need to make it clear whether we want to come at it from the angle of users or buyers. And I think as well that if we come at it from the angle of buyers, it's still useful for UX research to be involved. We'd still be happy to help do interviews and things like that. Because we need to have an overview of the buyer to the user anyway. It's helpful for us to have that knowledge.
Yeah, I would say the difference then becomes marketing then is driving the requirements for, so what personas are we missing? Where do we maybe need to shift how we have a persona right now? And then, that's honestly, that's
well,
it.
I think the other opportunity here is that product marketing, not marketing in general, but product marketing specifically. If you look at the kinds of people we're hiring and the talent we're bringing in, I know in my case, I am that persona. I've been that persona. Cindy, knows the security side. Cindy Blake. William, he's been learning these and driving the ops side of the house. And, so we've been bringing in people who've got the experience on that side of it. So as a resource, part of what we've always done has been focused on that. So I think it's a collaboration personally is just ultimately, but can somebody put the link to the insights repository in the chat, in the doc?
It's not been
Sarah, you were
created.
mentioning.
Yeah, it's not been created
What?
yet. So this is something completely new.
I wanted to go look at it.
Yeah,
Okay.
this is something, a big objective that we're trying to move towards at the moment. We want to ditch our research reports because nobody's reading them.
So what I called the IT groups, hidden IT groups, is this overarching Uber look at these hidden cultures that exist within an IT organization. It's from which I could say the personas probably live within one of those groups. They typically will align to one of them, and so for me at least, it's a starting point rather than getting into, I want to talk about this one persona. At this point, it's a stereotype of, let's talk about the people that kind of share these things in common. And it's in the handbook. We used it though as a way to model how we think about growing product marketing, to talk to these different groups that we have to engage with. And the term hidden is because they're not precisely defined. There is no clear definition as you're this or that. But boy, I'll tell you this much. When I talk to people, it's often very easy to figure out which group are they part of. The anecdotal example I had was a solution architect who had come to GitLab from having worked at version 1. And he's talking about project planning and how he just didn't get into it. He couldn't get into selling it because he said, I'm actually a developer. I want to code. I want to help people code. I wasn't, the planning stuff didn't make any sense to me. And he basically said, I'm this, not that. And he chose GitLab because it aligned to the group that he thought made the most sense to him. And it was fascinating to listen to him self-identify. And he didn't know that's what he was doing, but that's what he did. And I find that a lot when I talk to customers, I talk to people, they align along some boundaries like this. But by the way, so that's there as a reference, as a resource. Still very much work in progress, but I want to collaborate and figure out how we do this. Who owns it, how we do this, not so important. I think it's more important that we're doing this.
So when you say collaborate, what do you have in mind? Can you be more specific?
I think as we've worked together to define, where we think what goes into and how we're going to use personas, where we have gaps, as we start to research and dig into the personas, I think it's an opportunity where we have shared interests on it. So it's, for me, I think that the design system and the personas defined in the design system should be as important to me as they are to you in marketing. I think I think the design system and this part around the personas is a definition of what we know and who we think our audience is. And I think it's shared. And whether or not parts of it live in the handbook and we point to it in the handbook, or the URL it's under is less important to me than the fact that we are working together and we realize that we're stakeholders of each other's perspective and work on this. It's not as if I don't know. That's the way I see it. Tactically, what does that look like? I think it means we're talking to each other. We're planning together. As we're working on things, we're identifying how do we work on it together. So if you're working on a dev persona or a product manager persona or a executive persona, I'd like to help. It's one of those things that we're not working in silos.
Okay.
That's what it looks like to me.
I'm a very simple person, so I'm going to say this back to you as simply as I possibly can so you can confirm or deny. So it sounds like we all agree that they all need to be in one place. No one seems to have super strong feelings about whether it's in the design system site or in the handbook. I'll say I don't have strong feelings as long as it's in one place. So I would rely on my team to make that decision and just say, hey, this is where it's going to be. And we go, okay, that's where it's going to be. It seems like we need to take a look at the existing personas and make two decisions. One decision is, are not the content of the personas, but the personas themselves, are they complete as is, or are we missing some personas? I think the assertion in this meeting has been we're missing some. So we need to work together to figure out which ones are missing. Great. And then maybe Sarah and I, maybe we can talk about this in our one-on-one. We need to figure out how closely we think the UX personas can align with marketing personas based on what you've got in your head around the the research. You're not calling it a repository. I'm so sorry. What are you calling it?
No, it's about Insights repository.
Insights repository. There we go. So that seems like those are kind of our action items coming out. Is let's decide where it's going to live. Someone maybe needs to. So John, it sounds like you're the person in marketing that we can work with to figure out where the gaps are on personas.
I'll be glad to do that.
Okay, cool. Sarah, I think for you then, my question to you is, like, can you or Catherine do that today? Or that was my question earlier, or do we need to wait until you have another head available and somebody that we can actually put on that? Because I don't know what your workload currently looks like.
I think to do which part today?
So working with John to figure out where the gaps are, and then figuring out like what kind of research do we even need.
I was going to say, I think it's probably something myself, Catherine, and Emily could all work on together. Since we're the original people who put the personas together. So I think it'd be something that we could do async and we just chip at them one by one. And because we've all had different parts in creating those personas as well. Like Catherine's obviously creating ones on the dev side and Emily's on the ops side. So they're the specialists in the area. So I would like to get them to help as well.
Cool. Yeah, if you have the bandwidth to do it, that's wonderful. I am being very sensitive to how little help you guys have right now.
I think that's fine as long as we can just chip at it. Like when we've got a spare minute or so, then I think that's absolutely fine.
Awesome. Okay, cool. And then the third thing is Sarah, you and I are going to talk about UX personas in our one-on-one and get a better understanding of what we think we need. Okay, cool. So for the consolidation piece, that's the one thing that seems like we could action on pretty quickly. Does anybody want to pick that up?
I can put them in the repository if you want to. That's no problem. I'll do it next week, probably. I don't have that much availability this week. I'm going to Paris at the end of the week, so that's nice.
I don't think it's an emergency. I think next week is just fine.
Well, and I think we're already mostly there. I mean, in the design system, we have references to the buyer personas, which exist in the form of videos and slide decks. So at some level, I think it's there. We're referencing where they exist. We references the pricing page, the tiers of the pricing page, which I don't think matters from a buyer persona perspective. Christine, I would argue that the first step of consolidating is largely done. The only thing I would change in the persona stuff in the design would be either referencing the hidden IT groups as an element of it, which is really collections of personas where they're going to exist within those groups. I mean, you guys need to look at that and see whether or not that makes sense. But I mean, that framework, that overarching kind of structure has been at least without getting into, one persona, two persona, three persona, this gives us a framework to say, okay, this group of people have common challenges. So I think that's the only thing that's missing right now is referencing that here.
So my boss seemed pretty certain that there were multiple places where persona information lived and he wanted that to stop. So let me go find out from him specifically.
Yeah, I mean,
what he's looking at.
Yeah, because let's find out what he's thinking, where he thinks there are multiple definitions of personas, and I'll look in the product marketing stuff too to see what we have, because I think what we have in the product marketing part of the handbook is referenced is the same as what's here. I think I got to go look though.
And that might be what he means. So I think his concern was around single source of truth and not having any duplicative overlapping information out there. But let me hit him up. He's not in the office today, but I'm sure I can get an answer from him tomorrow. And
so there,
in a specific.
So there is so take a look at. It's funny because the buyer persona stuff is listed exactly in the handbook like it's listed in the design system. It looks like it was copied almost verbatim from here. And I'll put into chat the link that I was just looking at while we were talking. I'll put it into the Word document.
So that's an easy place to start, is to pick where it's going to be and basically say it's either here or there.
Well, it's a question of referencing and not having the same information in two different places. That's, I think, the problem right now, is that we have the same exact words in two different places. Then they should reference and point to the one place where we do it. So, which I agree with. It doesn't make sense to have the exact same words in two different places, because someone will change the exact same words to make them different, and then the question will be which one's the right one. Because we actually include references to.
Very nice.
Go ahead, Dimitri. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I just said, like, making sure that we don't have duplicate content in different places is a thing that should be solved, if there is any, as you say.
I think the difference of why they ended up though in different places is because obviously buyer personas were better in the handbook for like the product marketing team to share. But I think the UX personas ended up in the design system because we wanted people who were contributing to GitLab to be able to use them. Obviously, if we then move buyer personas into the design system, that's probably a bit of a weird experience. So I think we would be better moving the UX ones into the handbook. I'd also argue that it's easier to probably contribute to the personas when they're in the handbook for like people who are like non-designers, and you know, it's harder to contribute to the design system than it is the handbook.
I agree there fully. At the same time, I think the second problem you noted, it's easier to contribute to things in the handbook, is an anti-pattern that we should try to get rid of.
I totally agree. That's another topic for another time. But yeah, definitely, I agree.
What do you mean, Dimitri?
So
you're saying it should be harder to contribute to the handbook, or it should be easier? Are you saying it should be harder to contribute to the handbook, or easier to contribute to the design system? Which is it you were saying?
I was mostly intending to say that contributing to the design system shouldn't be harder than contributing to the handbook.
I'm with you there. Okay, I wanted to make sure I understood which anti-pattern you were referring to. I can live either way with it, but I think we could look at how do we resolve this and either point where appropriate. So you point to the buyer personas that exist in the handbook, and we could do that, or we could decide to move stuff.
I think it makes sense. I'm aligned with what Sarah says. I think the buyer personas is something the company strives for to get our sales going, while building the features for GitLab itself, and is actually targeting the people that actually use the product itself, which is different from the product that buy it, people that buy it, right?
And I think about it as I'm thinking about this now. Just let me see if I can state this in simple terms. I think there will be cases where we will have a buyer persona that will have a user persona side to it, that there would be a buyer persona that talks about why do they buy, what's their problem, what's their business problem, but they also will have a user perspective as a potential user too. We will end up with that scenario. I believe if we go down this path, we'll end up with a scenario where we'll have a buyer persona that talks to their purchasing problems, why they're buying, but there will be equally a user persona that says these are the things they're doing in a tool and the things they're looking for, and what from a user, and how do we design for that user, which will be different.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, we can in that case, right, we can link towards the buyer personas, like, hey, these are things that they are looking out for, that are missing, and that are actively contributing to their decision on whether to buy GitLab, yes or no.
So are we landing on a recommendation that Christine needs to go back to Eric and say, look, we're going to separate buyer persona and keep them, there's going to be two separate personas. One we keep kind of on the marketing side, the other one users that are in the design system. Is that what we're suggesting as the recommendation?
In my opinion,
that's what we have now. So I think that's exactly what we have now. We have the buyers in the handbook, and which is what we're pointing to from the design system. And then we have the UX personas, the user personas, which we created in the design system. And I think
today
what Chris is being told to do by Eric is to put them into one place. So I think that means moving the UX personas into the handbook.
Well, but I would suggest that today what we have is we have some overlap, where the buyer persona language exists in two places, exactly the same language exists in two places. And so maybe So I don't know. I think that's one option, is to say, look, we're going to keep them in two separate places, buyers here, users here, and we'll point to the other to make sure people can navigate to where they want to be. If they land on one, they want to know the other, they can go, but we won't duplicate information. That's one option.
Yeah.
The other option is to say, move it over.
I feel there's a hidden problem that is the root cause of this. And I think that is the way that Eric, approached this. He knows the handbook. He doesn't know the design system. This is a wager. I don't think he has looked at it that much. So I would want him to ask him that question myself. Like, hey, did you have a look at the design system? Have you actually used it once in things you need to do, or has it been used by the people directly reporting to you? How many of those people have used it? And I think most of the people, I expect, is an assumption, will say, I only use the handbook and not the design system. So in that way, I can understand his reasoning of like, hey, I just want everything in the handbook. I don't want to look in two different places, right? But
I think I agree.
What is right, I agree with like having the things in the design system and having the buyer personas in the handbook. I think that is the optimal state, but it's like chicken egg thing.
The other question I have, would it be useful to know, Christine, as you talk to Eric?
It's Christy.
Christy?
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
Oh my
it's
God.
okay. No big deal. Everybody does it. I just figured I'd catch you early before.
Thank you. Thank you.
Before we had like a
How did I get
relationship? No, go ahead.
Should put my glasses on more. Christy, I think one of the questions to understand Eric's motivation is useful to understand. Is this an item that Sid's asking him to do? Is it on his one-on-one with Sid that Sid's driving, and trying to push towards? And it's helpful to understand what's driving it.
I don't know. He did not tell me.
It's just helpful to understand that.
Yeah, he didn't tell me that the request came from Sid. So I'm thinking about UX personas, and then also thinking about Sarah's take on how we can use the research insights. No, the insights repository. I'm going to get this right, Sarah. I will get this right eventually. The insights repository to really be more of where that UX persona lives. And when I think about what a design system is for, which is more about component patterns than it is about usage behavior, it feels to me like we could, and especially since, Sarah, to your point, what's in the design system right now is not even the user personas, really, it is the marketing personas. We could probably take pretty quick action and say, okay, no problem, let's pull what's in the design system out. That gets rid of duplicative content. There's no downside to having this information in the handbook. So let's go ahead and just get it into the handbook, at least in some sort of updated format where we all go, this is all right. Doesn't have to be perfect, but this is all right. And then we can think about next steps after that. Does that seem reasonable?
Sounds good to me.
Cool, good deal. And then Dimitri, you said you volunteered next week to do that, right?
I can move them into one place if that is
awesome.
The thing we like if that is the action to go for right now and that gives us value, then I think that we should do that. I'm still on the fence of like, hey, we should have two places, but if that is the end goal we're striving for, that seems like a good idea and it doesn't work in the right now here, we should do something else. And I'll put it on my to-do list for next week.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's a really good short-term change. And then as we start to figure out how the insights repository works and where maybe that fits into the overall design system, we can always change from there. But at least that gets rid of duplicative content, and that's a positive thing.
So
cool.
Just from my understanding, the personas that are currently in the design system are marketing personas. They're not user personas.
No, the user personas, but obviously like product marketing, we're involved with them. So we wrote them to be kind of flexible in a way. But we targeted who we think were users. We couldn't concentrate on everyone. So again, we kind of got confirmation from product managers about what they wanted to get out of it. So they were the personas we concentrated on first. But we know that even since August, they have grown the type of people that we should be designing for. And I think this is where the Insights repository, I keep thinking about it, because we can't keep pace with the amount of personas that they want us to produce. But we can produce insights. That's something we're good at doing. We can do user interviews and we can collectively pull together those insights to give people an understanding of the type of user they should be designing for.
So
sounds good.
What do you say this is just a tactical way of solving this? If we were to, and I could go either way on this thing, right? I could go left or right. But if it's easier to manage the handbook, if we were to take the current content under research personas in the design system, and were to then update the product marketing page on personas with all of it, and from the design system, we point to that as saying, this is our single source of truth around all personas, buyer and user. And we know there's obviously potential overlap between buyers and users. That's a given. Would that get us to step one? And if we decided we wanted to move it all back to the design system, we could. I mean, then it would be in one place. It'd just be relocating the content. Is that what we're suggesting? I'm okay with that. I don't think that's a bad solution. And it addresses Eric's request.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what we were proposing. And Dimitri, I'll leave it up to you as you move the content, because to link to the handbook, to the personas in the handbook from the design system, sure, that makes sense. Does it make sense for it to still have its own page? I don't know. You're a good designer. You figure out where it goes.
Dimitri, I'll work with you on that.
Yeah, I'll create the merge request and CC you all for review and see if you want to attend to it, give some feedback, and then we'll merge that thing next week somewhere. By the way, as a quick note, this meeting has been going quite long. I thought maybe we could push it within the hour. That gives us around 5 more minutes, and I think that's a pretty nice timing for this meeting. We can continue next time with any additional topics that we might have. So I want to give the opportunity for everyone, do you have any last points for this agenda, or any points that you want to discuss next time?
I think one thing that I will just raise quickly, and this is for John, is that product marketing, we've worked with you intermittently now and again, and I think we should have a regular meeting set up between UX research and product marketing, and in that way we can be sharing insights more regularly. And I work quite closely with Cindy on the secure side as well, and she's fantastic, so I think it would be really good to get insights from the rest of the team.
I love the fact that we're asynchronous. My inbox and my calendar, I think having that regular cadence helps to drive that. I think the cadence of being face-to-face in these meetings helps us. So it's a combination of synchronous and asynchronous. Yes, I agree completely.
I have a last point I want to quickly touch upon, but we don't have to go way into it. I saw this point, number E at point 5 by Christy. Decide how to infuse personas into our design thinking. Sarah proposed a label into the research repository. I introduced some labels, more general group labels. I think, personas give their value when they're actually being used. And I think that is currently still kind of missing. So perhaps this is a point for next time, think of ways how we can improve this and are aligned on this, cross-functionally. I think that is, it's nice to set up personas, but they should be used. So yeah, my intention is to set it up for next time. Does somebody want to take the lead on the UX research team or this meeting for next time? Otherwise, I'll put on the meeting.
I'm happy for you to do it, Dimitri, if you're sure you don't mind.
Sure. And then I think we're at the end. If you're talking, you're on mute, Christy.
Darn it! I was on mute. I said thank you for being the one to take point on making those changes. I really appreciate it. It's really cool of you. And John, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'll look forward to getting to know you more. I'll put some time on your calendar.
Absolutely. Christy, good to meet you as well. Welcome to GitLab. This is fun.
Thanks.
It's a roller coaster ride, so it's awesome. Dimitri, thank you so much. This is good.
I propose, I don't know, 2 weeks,
Yeah.
3 weeks. What do you think is a good idea?
Every 2 is fine. 2-week cadence is probably fine.
Sounds
We
good.
can get together, keep each other up to date.
All right.
I have
Thank you so much,
my
everyone.
next meeting. Now my next meeting.
Bye.
Great day, everybody. Bye-bye.